Okay, so we're on Lamed Ches Amud Aleph, 38a Aleph. Um, so I think we'll be near the end of 38a1. So about 11 lines from the top. Ella Amarami Bar Chama. So we're talking about, so we're in the middle of a discussion kind of that why do we need extra psukim, not take a kofar redemption payment for a death penalty, and then for galus, why do we need all these other sources? So at the very bottom of Lamed Zayin Amud Beis, Rami Bar Chama says we need to not take kofar and kol cherem. So one opinion for kol cherem was if someone's being taken out to be killed because they already were found guilty and had a psak din to be killed by Beis Din, and someone says, I'm going to give the value of that person to the Beis Hamikdash, he has no value. So the Gemara says, well, what don't we learn that from Lo Sikhu Kofer? Why do you need Kol Cherem? So Rami Bar Chama says that I would have thought that you can't take a Kofer payment, a redemption payment, if you killed someone going up, meaning if you're going up a ladder and then you slipped off and killed someone, you're exempt from Gullus, because there's a principle for Gullus, it has to be Derech Yerida, going down. So I might think that going up is meaning so something that's strict enough to get a punishment of death or Gullus. You can't pay money to be exempt from going to Gullus or from getting killed. But if it's even more lenient than that, let's say you killed on the way up or on the way of when you were putting the axe up, not putting the axe down, but putting the axe up or climbing up a ladder, because that's more, it's so lenient that you don't even have to go to Gullus, maybe you would pay a kofar payment. Oh, because there is no kapara for that, money doesn't help, but maybe going down, because there is Gullus, maybe you could go to, you can pay money, so Kamash Malan, that it doesn't work. So Rava asked that this doesn't make sense because Tandi Dvei Chizkiya, the yeshiva of Chizkiya, said, Maka Behema Maka Adam, we saw this before, that just like so Maka Adam Maka Behema, just like so Tandi Dvei Chizkiya, and we saw this earlier. I mean, we saw it last week, but we saw it that just like if you kill an animal, it doesn't matter if it's accident or on purpose, going up, going down, you pay money. So when you kill a person, it doesn't matter, you never pay money. You would always get another payment. So we don't need this pasuk of kol cherem, or what's it called? Where's it going left? Oh, it's going right. Someone said in Yerushalayim when the Brisker Rabbi moved to Israel. I mean, and Brisker would have done the same thing, but they'd have ambulances. When you heard an ambulance, he'd say a kapitel Tehillim.
Oh, yeah. So yeah, I remember you texted me that you did the same.
Was that when I saw it on your block? And I was worried that was your mother-in-law, so I said a kapitel Tehillim. But that was he did, because in Yerushalayim it was probably a Jew being there. So that I said it because it was on your block. There was a likelihood that it was.
I remember that.
So if Tani Dvei Chizkiya already taught that Maka Adam Maka Behema, just like when you kill an animal, it doesn't matter how you did it, you pay money and you never get killed. When you kill a person, when you kill a person, you never pay money. So we don't need this other pasuk of kol cherem to tell us that you don't pay money when you killed someone. So Ella Amar Rabbi Bar Chama Itzrich. So Rabbi Bar Chama says we need the other pasuk of kol cherem, and not to take kofar is needed to teach us a different is needed anyway. I might think that you're only exempt from paying money and getting a death penalty if you caused the damage and you killed him with the same action. So let's say you knocked him in the eye and you killed him from the same injury. So from one act, I can't pay him for the value of the eye that he has now lost, plus get a punishment for killing him, which I killed him while I injured his eye. But let's say I was beating him up, and so one act was I knocked his eye out, and then later I killed him. So it's two separate acts. I might think I might think that I would pay money and get a death penalty because it was two separate blows that did the two things. I need the pasuk of kolcherim and kofer to say even in those cases when there's any death penalty, you never pay money, even if the injury that for which you're paying money isn't the same exact blow as what caused the death. Amar le Rava said to Rami bar Chama, Hanami me'idach tanid ve'chizkiya nafka. We know that halacha from a different teaching of the yeshiva of Chizkiya. The tanid ve'chizkiya, the yeshiva of Chizkiya taught ayin tachas ayin v'lo ayin v'nefesh tachas ayin. An eye for an eye, and not an eye for us, and a soul for an eye. So you won't pay and get killed if you only damaged one of his organs. No. Ayin tachas ayin it's in two places. It's in Mishpatim and it's in Emor. We learned about killing people a little bit in Parsha Shoftim, but not an eye for an eye. Ella Amar Rav Ashi Itzrich. Rav Ashi says we need the extra pasuk of not taking kofar and not taking cherem. Since the whole idea of paying a fine, so meaning what we call nezek, damages, is restitution. You cause damage of this, so you pay money for that value. When you pay over and above that, when you pay any knas, which includes the 50 shekel that we've been talking about in our parak, when raping a virgin, I might think that a knas, because the Torah innovated that you have to pay a fine, and Rashi points out it's Gzeras Melach, the decree of the king. I might think you have to pay a fine even if they're getting any other punishment. So the chiddush is that for fines you also don't have to pay fine when you're getting a death penalty. Kamash Malan. So the extra psukim say when you're getting killed, you do not pay money, even if that money is a knas.
How does it work? So somebody needs to be executed, and he still needs to pay money, right?
So we're saying if he's being executed, he never will pay money. That's what we're learning from here.
But if they said, okay, you need to pay money, after that you'll be executed. I don't give money.
Well, you're saying he's going to try to.
I have to collect this money for another 50 years.
Right, or they'll sell him for an Eved Ivri. No, so the thing is, they'll kill him. They're not going to let him wait. Because they say he's not chayiv, but because he's getting killed, he doesn't have to pay the money. According to Rabbi, who says that when you have to pay a knas and you get a death penalty, you do have to pay the knas. The Torah innovated this knas, so you always have to pay it. It doesn't matter if there's even if there's a death penalty. What does he learn from the pasuk kol cherem? So the Gemara says, Savar la Tanakama the Rabbi Hanana ben Akavya. He holds like the Tanakama of Rabbi Hanana ben Akavya. So he can't hold. So he'll learn that kol cherem is saying that the person has no value. When someone's being put to death and someone says, I'll give his value to the Beis HaMikdash, so he can't learn that pasuk any other way. So these other things were according to the opinion that you could learn that in a different way. Because Rabbi Hanan ben Akaveh holds you can give him value because the Torah, because according to him, there's a set value. Male 20 to 50 years old pays this. Male above 50-year-old pay that. Female this age pays this. Female that age pays that. Because everything is set, even though the person himself is about to be put to death, but he falls into the category. So Rabbi cannot agree with Rabbi Hanan ben Akavya, so he holds that from Kol Cherem we learned that when a person is about to be put to death and you want to give his donation, a donation equal to his value to the Beis HaMikdash, he's valueless. You don't owe anything to the Beis HaMikdash. Mishnah in the middle of Lamed Ches Amud Aleph. Narishan is Arsav and Garsha. What if you had a Nara, so a 12-year-old who had showed signs of puberty, that became engaged and then she got divorced? So we started with the parak if she got raped, period. Then we learned if she got raped by someone who she has a kares relationship with. Then we learned if she has someone she has a skila or a hereg relationship with, a misas bastin relationship with. So now, what if she was engaged? So that's stam. What if you have a nara who was engaged and then someone raped her? So engaged meaning someone gave her kedushin. So Rashi points out in that case, the guy would get skila, not skila, misa, because it's a death penalty because she's married. I mean, the chuppah didn't take place yet, but kedushin took place. She would get he would get killed, and depending if she was willing, she would get a death penalty. But if the rape, obviously, she wouldn't get a death penalty. And because he would get a death penalty, he wouldn't pay a knas, though it would be a machlokas. What we just saw, according to Rabbi, Rabbi, who says that a chiddush, so because a knas is an innovated thing, even if a person gets put to death, they would die. So according to Rabbi, who's not a Tana, he's an Amora, you could pay a knas. But according to Rabbi, if you get a death penalty, you wouldn't pay a knas. What if the Nara was engaged? They had kedushin. Someone gave her a ring, but then they got divorced before the chuppah. What's her status? Is she like a regular Nara that if you would rape her or seduce her, you'd pay the fine of 50 shekel? Or is she not? Since she's not single, she'd already a marriage wasn't consummated, but because obviously this isn't a case of kedusha bia, because if she's a kedusha bia, she wouldn't be a basula, she wouldn't be a virgin anymore. Rabbi Yossi Aglili Omer Ein La Knas. Rabbi Yossi Aglili says there is no 50 shekel fine. Rabbi Kiva Omer Yesh La Knas v'Knas La Atzma. Rabbi Kiva says that she has a knas, but she gets to keep it. Since she was married, or to some degree she had kedushin, so she left her father's domain, so she gets to keep it. So the Gemara is going to discuss why Rabbi Yossi Haglili says there is no knas, and the Gemara is going to explain why Rabbi Akiva holds that there is a knas. But the main difference is the previous cases she was a single girl. Here, never married. Here she was married with only Erison and not Nesuin, so that's why her status might be different. Well, according to everyone, her status is different. According to Rabbi Akiva, there is a knas, but she gets to keep the knas. And according to Rabbi Yosef Glili, there's no knas at all. There's no 50 shekel fine. So the Gemara says, my time to Rabbi Yosef Glili. What's the reason of Rabbi Yosef Glili that the rapist doesn't have to pay a fine at all? Amar Kra, Asherla Orasa. So the whole pasuk says, when a person will seduce a virgin who is never engaged and lays with her, you must hurry and he will be married to her. So according to the Torah, he should marry her unless she doesn't want. And if not, he has to pay the 50 shekel. That's in the next pasuk. So because the pasuk says Asher la orasa, that she was never mu'urasa, she had never had kedushin done on her, that's when this halacha applies. But since this girl had been mikudeshes, even though now she is no longer because they got divorced, this halacha of knas does not apply. Rabbi Akiva Asher la orasa la via. So Rabbi Akiva learns it's true. This pasuk says Asher la orasa, but it means when the knas goes to her father is if she's never had been engaged. But if she had been engaged, the rapist will still pay the 50 shekel, but she will get to keep it. Lavia ha orsa, but
it's still allowed to
so she was, let's say she was 12. Her father accepted kedushin on her behalf. But then a few months later, they decided to get divorced. They never had chuppah. So now she's single again. So that's the case. So she's still a basula. She's still a virgin because the marriage never got completed. And that's the case that this mission is talking about. So Rabbi Yossi Aglili says if she would get raped when she's still an ara, no fine of 50 shekel. Because the pasuk says in the context of the 50 shekel is if she was never engaged. Lo orasa, she never had kedushin. No one ever gave her the ring before.
Why do you think Laura spends so much time on things like this? Did this happen A lot. I can't believe a lot of these cases we've been talking about.
So probably mafuta would be more common than rape. Because mafuta, he convinces her, he talks, so that's more. But then the question is, how about what these incestuous cases that we mentioned? How would that happen? So I would explain according to the Rambam. Because according to the Rambam in Mornevuchim, why were all these things forbidden in the Torah? Because basically in those days, in those cultures, families tended to stick together. So a lot of these close relatives lived in close proximity to another. So you might have been more disposed to marry them. So therefore the Torah had to specify that these close relationships were incestuous and were usher. So if you go according to that viewpoint, you again, maybe not rape, but they're nearby, they're close with each other, they see each other a lot, they're familiar with each other. So he convinces her.
But it's also even more so if you're in small quarters. I mean, everybody knows this girl or woman's betrothed. I mean.
Oh, so most of these cases she's not betrothed.
Okay.
Most of the cases in this parak is not. But this particular Mishnah is saying if she had been betrothed, but then they got divorced and the marriage never was finalized, they never had chuppah. So since the marriage was never finalized, is she still have a din as a basula? Her virginity was taken by this person who raped her or seduced her, and she would get 50 shekel. Or that's machlokes between Rabbi Yossi and Rabbi Kiva. Or since she had never been married, the marriage hadn't been finalized, she still is in the category of this halacha of the 50 shekel.
50 shekels, big money.
I don't know. The tax you had to pay for a korban was half a shekel, so this is 100 times that. I don't know exactly. I don't. According to this, I don't remember these weights. This doesn't have shekel here. Tamir kotim shekel, half a sela. According to this one, one sela. Oh, it's not much. It would be about 17 grams or about 0.6 of an ounce. So if that's 1 shekel times 50, so about 25 ounces of silver. And what's silver? $25 an ounce, $20 an ounce now these days?
Forgot, yeah.
So I don't know exactly, but I mean,
Not a huge money in any case.
no.
I'd say it's probably less nominal amount.
Okay, according to this, so is Zuz, I think the halacha is by tzedakah that 200 zuz, if a person has 200 zuz, they'd be able to buy a small field and support themselves. So according to this, in silver, 200 zuz would be 50 shekel. So 50 shekel would be about the value of about a quarter of the amount of the value to buy a field that you could support yourself for a year. So from that perspective, it's not a huge amount of money, but then again, you also have to pay Posha Supagam for her embarrassment and for her devaluation. But this is a fine. It's a knas. It's a fine. So Marty, did my answer help understand it a little bit better?
Yeah.
Now, how often did these things happen? We don't know. I mean, one thing that we have, my father mentioned this morning, the machlok is about Ben Sora Mora. Did it actually happen or not? So no one has that discussion about this. This is obviously more common than a very specific case where a guy is going to steal money and then buy a lot of food and drink a lot of wine and stuff like that.
I still have a big problem with it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, we're talking about Jewish people that are following the Torah. I'm sorry. I don't get it. Sorry.
So according to the people who say that that the science is wrong and the Torah is right, they would have a harder problem of explaining this. But according to people who say that science plays a big role, obviously I would say that that hormones are hormones, whether you're Jewish or you're not Jewish. Some people are better at fighting the Yetzer Hara than others. But does the Yetzer Hara exist for people who keep the Torah? Yeah, it does exist.
In the age of 18, 20, hormones are the same, pretty much the same for Ben Torah and whoever else.
Okay, I mean, and again, I always have another separate problem. Viewing then and viewing now. Okay, because no question, I do think that like people and attitudes were different. But right now, the way we view rape is it's a violent crime.
Yes.
And
right. So I actually saw something on the internet about this yesterday about, I don't know if it was in India, but up until not, maybe 50 years ago, they had a law similar to the Torah that if you rape someone, you should marry her. So from that perspective, if it's a violent crime, you would say the perspective is this is a horrible thing that the Torah makes you do.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's changed. That part's changed.
Right. That part's changed. Attitudes for that have changed.
Yeah.
Lahavdil, I think, to say attitude towards gay marriage has changed a lot in 20 years, not to mention 50 years. That's something where in society it's changed a lot also. Or take someone Obama when he was running for president, he was not in favor of gay marriage. Maybe what's it called? Maybe special unions, but not marriage. And by the end of his term, what happened? The court had basically allowed all of it.
And he changed his view on homosexuality in the army and stuff too.
Right. So I'm saying, so in a few years, because of, I guess, public opinion, he changed it. Not that politicians need any excuses, but just to show that society's view has changed on things.
Yeah.
So that's something where the society's view has changed a lot, to a very strong 180 degrees in a pretty short time. So yes, so once you identify rape as a violent crime, the fact that you say they should get married really doesn't make any sense.
Right. Yeah. I mean,
and then I saw this thing literally yesterday on the internet that I think was in India, that it was only till like 50 years ago that they had, but the fact that their law was so similar to the Torah, that was an interesting thing.
Yeah.
The Torah didn't could have been, according to the Rama and Nevuchim, I don't know what the Nevuchim says about this, but it could be that this halach in the Torah was similar to what other cultures would do at the time. But part of it was, to some degree, it could be a punishment of the man. You think you just want her and that's it? Amnon and Tamar type relationship in Pirkei Avos? No, you can't just decide to have this one-time relationship to her and then move on. And and obviously, if it's traumatic for the woman, doesn't seem to be like a good thing. But it is to the man to try to say, if you have this impulse, it's not just a one-time impulse and you're done with it. You're going to have consequences for your whole life also for it. Is that something we would say nowadays? Not really. But trying to look at it as Reb Chaim was critical of the people who tried to make Esav into a big tzaddik for being kibbut av v'aim, and Yaakov. He said, "Don't dress the avos in our own clothes." it's easy from the way things are for us. It doesn't mean that's how the things were then. So now we're 4 lines below the Gemara started. Asher lo orasa. So Rabbi Akiva Asher lo orasa lavia harasa la atzma. So because when the pasuk says if she was never engaged yet or had kedushin, then the knas goes to her father. But if she was engaged and then got divorced, there still is knas, but she gets to keep it herself because once she left her father's house because of the kedushin, so now she has her own. She's in charge of her own finances, and her father doesn't get that money anymore. Elamayata nara v'lo bogeres hachinami dila atzma pesula v'lo ba'ula hachinami dila atzma. According to that logic, the pasuk says nara, so we should make a drasha that a nara, a 12-year-old, but not a bogeres. Once that's 6 months after she became a nara, hachinami dila atzma. According to Rabbi Akiva, he should say that if this happened to a bogeres, she should get the fine. Besula v'lo ba'ula. When the pasuk says besula, virgin, so the implication is not someone who is no longer a virgin. Hachinami de la atzma. Rabbi Akiva should say that the fine should also be to her. Clearly, though, if she's not a besula, there's no fine at all. So the logic of Rabbi Akiva's drasha over here does not fit with other parts of the psukim. Because also a bogeres, there is no fine at all. So Ella Lagamri. So rather, Rabbi Akiva has to agree that a bogeres and a non-besula don't have any knas at all. Hachanami Lagamri. So also when it says Asher la orasa, it should be that if she was previously engaged, even though she's divorced, she shouldn't have a fine at all. So what we did here is, according to the drasha that we tried to say in Rabbi Akiva, we showed that you would have some absurd drashos with the same logic with other words in the same pasuk. Therefore, that precludes this drasha from being possible to be the drasha. That's what the Gemara just asked over here. Amar lecha Rabbi Akiva. So Rabbi Akiva will say, "Hi lo orasa miboyle lechidatanya." So the word lo orasa, that she had never been betrothed before, we need it to teach us the following halacha. Asher la orasa prat lenara shenisarsa v'nisgarsha she'ein la knas divrei Rabbi Yosef Glili, who is never betrothed. This includes precludes or excludes a nara who had been engaged but then got divorced before the chuppah. She'ein la knas. She does not have, if she gets raped or seduced, there is no 50 shekel fine. Divrei Rabbi Yosef Glili. So that's like our Mishnah. Rabbi Yosef Glili. Rabbi Akiva Amar Yesh la knas uknas lavia. Rabbi Akiva says she has a knas, and the knas goes to her father. So that's different than what our Mishnah said. Our Mishnah says that it goes to her. So don't forget about this, but that's not what the Gemara is talking about right now. The Hadin no saying, and this is logical. Since her father is able, when she's a nara, to be Makadesher, and he gets to keep the money, and her father also gets the 50 shekel knas if she would have been raped. Just like if a man gave kedushin for her, if she would get divorced before the chuppah, and then she'd still be a nara, her father could be makadesh her again. Af kesef knasa af pisha nisarsim nisgarsha lavia. So too, if she got raped after that case, her father would keep the money. Im kain matam lamar asher la orasa. So then, what's the chiddush? What's the Torah teaching us with the phrase she was never previously betrothed? Mufne lahakish lo v'ladon hemenu gzera shava. It is available to make a hekish, and we can make a gzera shava from it. Meaning, it's there for a drasha. We don't have a drasha to make from the words itself to include this or to exclude this. So we're going to make a gzera shava with the word. So remember, gzera shava is like a common denominator. Shava is equal. So if the pasuk uses this word in this halacha and the same word in another halacha, we're going to learn, just like the other halacha has a certain detail, our halacha also has a detail. So what's the gzera shava? Nemar kan asher lo orasa, v'nemar l'halan asher lo orasa. It says here, by this young woman, asher lo orasa, she was never engaged, and it says by the seduced girl, asher lo orasa. So ma kan chamishim, just like the Torah here tells us that the fine is 50 shekel, aflahalan chamishim. It teaches us that there by the seducer, the knas, the fine that he pays is also 50. Umalahalan shkalim, and just like by the seducer, the Torah says he has to pay shekel. It doesn't say the amount, but it has to be shekel, which is silver. Avkan shkalim. So here also we learn shkalim. Asher la orasa tells us we use asher la orasa according to Rabbi Akiva to make Gzera Shava, that the money that's paid, the knas that's paid for Nara Marasa is 50 shekel because of a combination of shkalim by the seduced woman, and it says 50 coins over here. So Rabbi Akiva, so the Gemara asks, according to Rabbi Akiva, my chazis asher la orasa Gzera Shava, how come he uses asher la orasa for this Gzera Shava to learn from the seduced girl, ubesula lemute beula, and he uses the pasuk besula to a virgin lemute beula to exclude a beula, that there wouldn't be 50 shekel. Fine, as we turn the page, Lam Chesam Beis, Ema besula legzera shava, asher la orasa prat lenarash nisarsa v'nisgarsha. Why don't we use besula for gzera shava? And since we're not using a gzera shava, and we'll say that the knas goes to her herself, because remember, in our Mishnah, Rabbi Akiva said the knas goes to herself. In this brisa, Rabbi Akiva says the knas goes to her father. So because we're asking about the brisa, let us not use the Gzera Shava, so the knas would go to her and not her father. And Asher lo orasa, who was never betrothed, excludes a girl who had been engaged, or her father received kedushin for her when she was a nara, and she got divorced when she was still a nara. That she does not get a fine at all. Why does Rabbi Akiva hold that there is a fine and the fine goes to her father? Mistabra asher la orasa gzera shava. It makes more sense to say that asher la orasa is to learn a gzera shava. Shaharei ani kore ba nara besula, because it's applicable to say that she is a nara basula, a virgin maiden, nara. Because since the marriage had never been finished, she's still a basula. The Gemara doesn't like that. It says Adarabba basula l'gzera shava. Let's learn a gzera shava from the word basula, virgin. Shaharei ani korba asher la orasa. Because I can't say that she had never been betrothed. So are we focusing on the fact of Nara, or are we focusing on the fact of Asher la orasa? So the Gemara says, Mistavra, that the engaged girl who is divorced has a fine and a non-virgin doesn't have the fine, Hayishtani Gufa. Because if she was not a virgin anymore, her body has actually changed. Because before she had hymen, and now she doesn't have a hymen. Hello, Ishtani Gufa. But the one who was married and who had kedushin and divorced, but was never, but the marriage was never consummated, her body hasn't changed from the Nara Basula. Okay, Rabbi Yossi Aglili, Hai Svarim Minale. According to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, how do we know that? So Rabbi Akiva used Gzera Shava to learn that the amount of the fine is 50 shekel, because he learns Gzera Shava from the seduced girl. So according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, what's Rabbi Yossi Aglili's source that the amount of the fine is 50 shekel? So the Gemara says, Nafkale Midatani. He learned it from the following brisa: Kesef Yishkal Kamohar Basulos. So if someone raped her, he will pay silver like the Moar Habasulos. So Sheyehezeh Kamor Habasulos. This amount of money has to be like the amount of money that's the going rate, shall we say, for a basula. Umor Habasulos Kazeh. And the amount that you give a basula is like this. So meaning in the Kesuva, the basula would get 50 shekel more than a ba'ula, and then now on our Kesuvos we double it. So a regular one would be 50. she would be 100 because she gets an extra 50. And we do a doubling the ksuba so that it's a 200 zuz in total. So he learns 50 zuz from Mohar Basulos. Now, I don't know what this matters, but the Torah Tamima in an essay mentions that the word Mohar is one of the words. He has a list. Maybe there's 25 or so. I don't remember exactly, but there are some Aramaic words in Chumash. And some Rishonim explain Mohar in a different way, that it is Lashon HaKodesh, but many Rishonim explain it away that the word Mohar is actually an Aramaic word, which is in the Torah. Now, one of the most obvious Aramaic words in the Torah is when Lavan named the pile of stones Yegar Sadusa. So obviously that was the Aramaic term for a pile of stones, and Yaakov called it Galed, the pile which is a witness. But
like a proper name, otherwise.
Let's put this. There's an Egyptian word in the Torah too. Paro called Yosef Tzafnas Paneach. What does Tzafnas Paneach means? He explains the hidden things. So there's times we can see from the context that he was from Arami. So there's an Aramaic word in the Torah.
It's a name. Yeah.
But it's a name. But the Indians, Sitting Rock or Raging Bull, the names were description of attributes or of actions even. So Tzafnas Paneach was a name, but the Tzafnas Paneach actually means the one who explains hidden things. So Yegar Sadusa meant pile which testifies to something. And in Hebrew, the same word meant gal aid. A gal is a pile and an aid is a testimony. So it's a monument to something. So it's not all Rishonim agree, but according to many Rishonim, it happens to be the word Mohar in Mohar HaBasulos is an Aramaic word, but it's in the Torah. And just for what it's worth, Rav Moshe has mentioned before that the halacha is that a get can be written in different languages, but it can only be written in one language. But if you look at our get, and it seems to be a combination of Hebrew and Aramaic. So how does that work? So he says, the way Rav Moshe explained it, it was more hashkav halacha, but it's very important halachically. I'm not saying it's not halacha. Is that Lashon HaKodesh is the Lashon of Tanakh, and there's plenty of Aramaic in Tanakh. Even if you take out the words in the Torah, which the Torah Tamima in his essay, Safal and Amanim mentions, but there's parts of Daniel and Ezra and Nehemiah which have Aramaic in it. So Aramaic is part of Lashon HaKodesh because it's part of Lashon of Tanakh. I mean, we know Megillas Esther has Persian words in it. Achash Dar Pnei HaMelech. There's Persian words. And we've mentioned an Egyptian word. But there's more of any language that's not Hebrew. There's definitely more Aramaic. And Daniel also. Did I mention Daniel?
Yeah.
Okay, so Daniel, Ezra Nehemiah, things like that. And then there are some words even in Chumash and Chamisha Chumshei Torah which are Aramaic. So therefore, the get isn't considered written in two languages, Chas v'shalom. It's one language because it's the language of Tanakh. Even if not all these words were in Tanakh, but Lashon HaKodesh, these words are from the languages that are in Tanakh. But to mix the Egyptian with the get, that wouldn't be. There happens to be one case where there's Egyptian words, whatever. But so now the Gemara says, Kosher Rabbi Kiva to Rabbi Kiva. The Brisa contradicts the Mishnah. Rabbi Kiva in the Brisa contradicts the Rabbi Kiva in the Mishnah. Because in the Mishnah, Rabbi Kiva says this girl who had Kedushin and then divorced and then was raped, she keeps the fine. The Brisa says the father gets the fine. So there's a stira, a contradiction of what Rabbi Kiva's opinion is. What is it? So the Gemara says, Trei Tanai Libid Rabbi Kiva. They were two different Tanaim who said what they heard from Rabbi Kiva. So Rabbi Kiva couldn't have said both, but there was a machlokas among his Talmidim or whatever of what he said. Rabbi Kiva de Masnisen. We understand Rabbi Kiva's opinion in our Mishnah that the knas goes to the girl. Lo asik zereshava umafkele lekrami pasha legamre. The Gzereshava does not change the simple understanding of the pasuk. So the simple explanation of the pasuk is that he has to pay 50 shekel. But Rabbi Akiva holds in this case the 50 shekel goes to her, not to the father. Even though if you literally took it 100% according to the pashtus of the pasuk, it would go to the father. But there's still the main idea that the rapist has to pay 50 shekel. That's still there. But the drasha, it means it goes to her, not to the father. Rabbi Akiva the Braisa asik zer shabam mafafkim mipashul gamri. But according to Akiva the Braisa, that the money goes to the father. Asik zer shava umafkim mipashul gamri. The zer shava removes the plain pshat of the pasuk, because the plain pshat of the pasuk is asher lo orasa. If she had never had kedushin before. So, Amar Nachman Bar Yitzchak, Kribe Asher Lo Arusa. So even though the pasuk says Asher Lo Orasa, read it as if it's the passive emphasis grammatical form. Asher Lo Arusa. She is not currently engaged. If she's currently engaged, there is no fine. But if she is not currently engaged, there is a fine. So the Gemara doesn't like that. Arusa baskilahi. If she's currently engaged, certainly there's no fine, because in that case, there would be a death penalty. So because there's a death penalty, there certainly wouldn't be a monetary payment. That's what we learned. When there's a death penalty, there is no money. So I might think, since a knas, a fine, is an innovative halacha from the Torah, it's a gzera of the melech, as Rashi pointed out, even in this case that he gets killed, he still would have to pay the fine. We saw this svara before the Mishnah on the top of the previous amud. So because of this logic, the word asher lo orasa, we darshan asher lo arusa, shows you that even if she's presently engaged, and therefore there's a death penalty of skila, the guy would not have to pay the 50 shekel fine. Well, Rabbi the Amar chidushu shechitcha Torah b'knas afagav the mikla mishale ma'ikla meimar. So, how would you learn the pshat of how would you darshan it according to Rabbi, who says that in this case, when the Torah issues a fine, because a fine is an innovative thing that we wouldn't have thought of before, the Torah requires the fine to be paid in all situations, even in a case where he gets put to death. So Rabbi cannot accord with Rabbi Akiva of the Braisa, who says that the knas goes to the father. He would have to hold like Rabbi Akiva of the Mishnah, that the knas stays with the young woman herself. Tanarabanan, we learned in the Braisa, for about 10 lines up from the bottom, Knasalami, who receives a knas So Rashi points out at this time, we don't know, we're assuming that this is not the same case as our Mishnah, when she had been engaged or had received kedushin, and then there was a divorce. We're assuming here that it's a regular case of she was raped. Who does the knas belong to? Knas lami, who receives the knas? La aviha. The Tanakama holds it goes to her father. V'yesh omrim, but some say la atzma, it goes to her. So the Gemara says, La'atzma amai. How could it go to her? The Torah explicitly says that the fine goes to her father. So how could we possibly say it goes to her? So Amar Rav Chisda, Hacha benarash and nisarsav nisgarsha skina. This isn't the brisa for a regular case of rape, but this is a case where she was a nara. Her father had accepted kedushin to someone else, and now she's divorced. The kamifle b'pluksa Rabbi Akiva de Masris and Rabbi Akiva de Braisa. And the two opinions in this brisa are expressing the opinions of Rabbi Akiva in the Mishnah, and they're according to Rabbi Akiva in the brisa. Because according to Rabbi Yossi Aglili, there's no knas at all. Here that we're saying that the knas either goes to her or her father, it's the two opinions of Rabbi attributed to Rabbi Akiva, one from the brisa that it goes to the father, and Rabbi Akiva the Mishnah that it goes to the young woman. Amr Abaye. Abai said, Ba'aleha umesa, pater. If he had raped her or seduced her, and then she died for whatever reason. She was run over by a raging bull, or she caught COVID, or maybe malaria, or whatever. She got sick and died. It was independent of this incident, but she died before the case was decided by Beis Din. Potter, the guy does not have to pay the 50 shekel. Shenemar, as the pasuk says, and I think we saw this like 4 or 5 blot ago, this Joshua. V'nasan lavi anara, v'lo lavi mesa. He has to pay the money to the father of the nara, but not to a father of a dead girl who's no longer a nara because she's dead now. Milsa de pshita leila Abaye, something which Abaye was confident about this halacha. Rava, but Rava was unsure about it. It was a shaila to Rava if that was the halacha. The boy Rava, because Rava asked, Yesh beggar bakever or ain beggar bakever. So remember, the state of naros is when a girl is 12 years old and shows physical signs of puberty. Bagros happened 6 months later. So the question is, well, the Gemara wasn't clear, but what the Gemara is going to say is that what Rava is asking, if she was 12 years old in 4 months, and she'd already reached the state of naros, but it wasn't 6 months after the state of naros, does she stay a nara forever? Or even though she's no longer alive 6 months after she became a nara, does she eventually have the status of being a bogeres, even though she's dead now? Now, the question is, if she's dead, what does it matter if she's a bogeres? So the Gemara is going to ask that in a few minutes. But Rava's question is, can she become a bogeres after she's dead? So the 6 month period after she becomes a nara, can that change her status of being a nara into a bogeres even though she's dead? So the Gemara says, Yesh beggar bakever vidivna have, that if she can become a bogeres after she's dead, if somehow she had a son. Now, you'd have to say that somehow she was raped and probably had a kid from that, and so that son or that child would be her heir. It's very difficult to really explain it any other way, because if she's a basula, if she's a virgin, she certainly can have a kid. So the situation here seems to be a little bit of a little bit hard to understand. Odilma ain bever davia have, and if she does not become a bogeres after death, the fine would stay to her father, because even though, let's say now the time they went to the Beis Din is 8 months after she became a nara, so she would be a bogeres, but because she died, the clock stopped. She stays a nara forever, and therefore, when the Beis Din witnesses finally come, whatever, Beis Din will give the knas to her father. So now the Gemara asks, but is it possible for her to become pregnant if we're saying that she's a bogeres? Excuse me, if she's a nara, she got raped, and she's dead within less than 6 months, how could she have a baby? The Hatani Rabbo Kamed Rav Nachman, Rabbo taught in front of Rav Nachman, Shalosh Nashim Mishamshos b'moch. 3 women are allowed to use a moch. So we saw a moch, which is a form of birth control, which nowadays, so we would probably call it a diaphragm. But according to Rashi, it was something that was an absorbent cloth, so that would absorb the sperm, so she wouldn't become pregnant. So even though birth control, under regular situations, is not allowed in halacha, but that's its own very big category, which we will not discuss right now. Eluhain, these are the people. Katana, ume uberes, ume nika. A minor girl, a pregnant woman, or a woman who is nursing. Katana shema tisaba v'tamo. So katana can't, because maybe she'll get pregnant and then die, because she's only a katana. Pregnancy could kill her. Someone who is pregnant because they were worried that if there would be more sperm, it might cause a disfigurement to the fetus that she's carrying. And if she's nursing her kid, we don't want her to get pregnant again, because if she'd get pregnant, she wouldn't be able to nurse her baby, and it would be dangerous for her baby to not be able to nurse from her anymore. They didn't have just like 6 months ago when you couldn't get any baby formula in the time of the Mishnah of the Gemara, you couldn't get any baby formula. And obviously the only chance would have been to hire a wet nurse, but sometimes that could have been super expensive. So it wasn't something that was an option for most people, it seems. The Ezoi Katana, and what is a Katana in regard to this halacha? Mibas achadasre shana v'yom echad, shtemasre shana v'yom echad. The age of 11 to 12. Pachus bikan v'yasar akan mishameshes kedarta v'olachas. If she's younger than 11 or older than 12, then she does not use this method of birth control. Diva Rabbi Meir, these are words of Rabbi Meir. So it seems, according to Rabbi Meir, that if she's younger, she's not going to get pregnant at all. The Rashi says if she's older than 12, if she gets pregnant, she's not going to die. But if she was younger than this, she wouldn't get pregnant at all. So there's no risk of her getting killed by this pregnancy because she won't get pregnant at all. Diva Rabbi Meir. These words of Rabbi Meir. But the Chachamim say that both cases, meaning all of these cases, the Ketana, the pregnant woman, the nursing woman, they do not use birth control at all. Umin Hashmaim Yirachemu, and the Hashem in the heavens should have mercy on them, that nothing bad will happen. Mishum Shenamar Shomer Pesayim Hashem. There's a pasuk that Hashem guards the simple people. So the Gemara in Yevamos adds b'makom shadasher be'rabim, something that's commonly done. Hashem will guard you, even though there is an element of danger. So Rav Aaron gave the example of driving on the highway, or driving the highway specifically at night, that is more dangerous than other things. But because it's a common thing that people commonly do, so even though it's an elevated risk, but Hashem will guard you, and you're allowed to do it. You don't have to refrain from it. And he said that used to be the heter for smoking, before the scientists said that smoking definitely causes cancer, because once you know that it's dangerous for sure, then the heter doesn't apply. But before they knew it was dangerous, they only thought that it was slightly, there was a slight risk to it, Shomer B'Sam Hashem. But so for these women, it's true, it's an elevated risk if she would get pregnant from this, but it's not enough. But we're saying Shomer B'Sam Hashem. So again, from this Gemara, at least according to to Rabbi Meir, she can't get pregnant if she's younger than 11. So how is it possible that she would, and in the meantime, according to Rabbi Meir, she wouldn't get pregnant because she would use birth control? But again, it is a case of rape. So I don't know exactly. We mentioned a couple of weeks ago about going upside down or turning over so that she wouldn't get pregnant from it. But again, how is it possible that she would have a kid, she would have a baby, which would be an heir, and the man would owe her knas, and the knas would go to her son because she would become a bogeres after she died. And if you say that she became, that in the time that she was a nara is when she got pregnant, and she gave birth while she was still a nara, and that's how she has an heir, you can't but you can't give birth within 6 months. But Amar Shmuel said, there's only 6 months between becoming a nara and becoming a bogeres. So it's not possible to give birth in 6 months. And so how can she ever give birth, have an heir, if she was a nara and died before she reaches the state of bagrus? Hatvei ikar chitema bater hu deleka. And if you want to say that Shmuel holds that the amount of time between naros and bagrus is at least 6 months, but not less than 6 months. Hatvei ikar, but it could be longer than 6 months. Ha elaka amar. He said there's nothing between nara and bogeres except 6 months, meaning that's it. Period. 6 months, not less, not more. It's 6 months. So how could she ever have an heir? So she can't. So this was the question that Rava had. Yesh beger bakever upaka av. Can she become a bogeres after death and therefore the father would no longer receive the fine. Odilma ain baba kever v'lo paka'av. Or she doesn't become a bogeres, and therefore the father is not removed from receiving the money, meaning the father can keep the money. So the first thing we wanted to say was, if she become a bogeres in the grave, then her kid, if she has one, will receive the money as her yoresh, as her heir. But then we said it's impossible, it's physically impossible for her to have a baby from that age and in that time frame. So we're saying that Rava's question was, if she was a Nara and then she died, can the father get it because she stays a Nara, or after 6 months is she no longer a Nara even though she's not alive? Mar Baravashi Bailehachi, Mar the son of Ravashi said that the question was this way: Misa Osa Bagrus, O Ain Osa Bagrus. Can death make her into a Bogeres, or does death not make her into Bogeres? And the Gemara says, Teku, we don't know what the answer to this, and some say that it stands for that Eliyahu Navi Tishbi Taretz Kushiyos Abayis, that Eliyahu Navi will answer our questions. Not everyone agrees that that's what it means, but we don't have an answer. So we will leave it here at Boy Mine Rava Me Abaye on Lamites Amid Aleph.